Hello, and welcome to the Long Island Local Podcast, brought to you by Audio Workstations here in Bohemia, New York. Let's jump right into the conversation with a Long Island local business owner. Welcome, everyone, to the Long Island Local Podcast. We are here today with Alex Wolff. Alex, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I was looking forward to this.
Yep, we've been planning it for a few weeks now, and we've been looking at your lovely art for a few weeks as well. Thank you for that. We'll touch back on that. But first, I want to introduce the three separate business ventures that Alex is involved in that we'll be talking about today. Number one is Alex Wolff Fine Art. Mm-hmm. Right. And then we also have concierge photography that you're able to do for people.
Correct.
Right. And then we have a program called Headshot Rescue that we will discuss. Okay.
Awesome.
So we can't talk about it all at once, but we can break it up and try and evenly discuss things nicely. But before we get to item one, item two, item three here, I want to find out when art became a prevalent force in your life. How early on, how late on, when did it develop?
Wow. That's... I didn't prep that question.
I gotcha.
You do have me. Art's always been a part of my life. But I was pursuing it, really started, I guess, in the 1980s when I was working on Wall Street. And I was doing photography for a long time. Got my first camera in 1965. So even by 1980, I've been doing it for a while.
Now, when you say you were working on Wall Street, you were working in financial, or you were doing photography for Wall Street people?
Financial stuff.
Okay, so you were in the world of finance in the 80s. That's an important historical fact. I'm glad I know.
Yeah, and walking around, of course, you have all the architecture, the Brooklyn Bridge, the World Trade Center.
Sure.
But really, sometimes what would catch my eye is the things that nobody noticed, or things that people would walk past on my first show called Moments. And a big part of that show was raindrops on cars, and also raindrops, or the rain that created... You ever see the oil slicks in the street after it rains?
Sure.
Converting that into art. And that's
Okay.
what I was displaying a lot at the time.
You get a little of a rainbow sometimes in those things? Is that what
You
happens?
get a lot of different things in there. Sometimes a little bit of a rainbow, sometimes really great shapes, everything from lions to fireballs.
Cool.
I have one that people call a spirit in the sky, which looks like a space witch with that's pregnant carrying a baby.
Wow. So what you're saying is that looking at oil slick patterns when it rains in the city is sort of like looking at clouds, and we could do the interpretive art of the patterns, and it just speaks to everyone a little differently.
Absolutely. But as a photographer back then, I would capture it as it was. Mm-hmm. But since then, I've discovered Photoshop. That was the 80s.
Okay.
And now when I do it, that's a starting point instead of an end point, where I can work with the colors, the shapes, and move things around a little bit and really create art.
Okay.
Going from the capture to create.
That's cool. So on the capture side, you can take a photo of the way that the oil is sitting in the water, and it sort of suggests certain shapes to every individual human that looks at it like clouds. But then what you're saying is you can go a step further and then look at it, what you've captured in a photo, think about what you think it is, and then you can bring that out even further with the more interpretive art on top of that.
Absolutely.
That's cool.
And that's a play with color, sharpness. And I have a whole series of photos I did at Jackson Pollock's studio in East Hampton that actually took his garbage, the paint that missed the canvas.
Okay.
And when I was there on a tour in 2014, we could jump, it's art. It's
okay.
expands.
We can jump around, and time travel is part of art.
Absolutely. So back in 2014, I captured about 30 different images of little pieces of his floor because the paint splatter that caught my eye.
Sure.
And so I've converted his work, his garbage, into artwork, which if you're looking at my shirt, this shirt is actually part of that, and it's the same principle that goes back to those oil slicks back in the 80s and what I've been doing with them since.
Yeah, it's about what you see in it, and it's like whether or not there was intention or organization that was conscious in the mind of an artist, like we think of creating art, the patterns that you see either in nature or by accident, whether it's Jackson Pollock's scraps or it's the oil slick and the raindrops, you find something in that with the interpretive power of the human mind, and then you create something from that.
Absolutely. That's just what happens is you start to see things that aren't necessarily there. Pollock was a guy who did, he did regular painting before he was doing his drip painting, very famous even before then. But when he was doing his abstract art, he thought his work was so abstract that he wouldn't name it. All of those things are called Untitled 1, Untitled 2, Untitled 3, 3A, because of a naming mistake that wound up sticking. And he didn't want to shape how people saw his art. He wanted them to see what they saw.
Yeah. And that's, I guess, a big part of the art experience is the intention of the artist versus the interpretation of the viewer, listener, experiencer, whatever type of art medium we're talking about. And, what is more important? Are they equally important? Does it ruin art when artists explain their art to people? Does it take away that power from the viewer if you over-explain it? Or even that example of Pollock would be like that titling is too much.
And the converse is if you don't name it, you don't tell people what to look for. If the artist doesn't state their intention, then sometimes people will bypass that art without understanding. So sometimes the name is very important.
Yeah, and I think that probably boils down for me to just including language as part of the art, or including, if you were to consider a title of a painting an associated brief poem, if you will. And now these are sort of two pieces of art that coexist together in an overall package that's meant to be taken in as one. You know what I mean? And so I guess what he was doing there was sort of taking away that aspect and just saying let the visual thing exist on its own without the linguistic thing that accompanies it.
Exactly, because everyone gets to see what they want to see in a picture. One of the pictures I was showing to somebody at an art show at the Marriott Marquis recently, I asked them what they saw in that particular photo, and she saw a uterus. Okay. And since then, every time I look at that photo where I had never seen the uterus before, that's all I could think about.
Yeah, the power of suggestion. Yeah, there's a place I know that has some marble structure, and there's the random patterns in the marble, but I see like a rabbit and a turtle, and it makes me think of the parable of the tortoise and the hare every time I look at this one slab of marble. Right. And it's just no one put that in there. My mind put that in there. Yeah. So, yeah, that's fascinating, the way that art and language and the power of suggestion and how that influences the way you interpret the art when you make the suggestion about what this might be about or some words that might, contribute to it. Okay, so I'm starting to see how the New York City raindrops and oil slicks become a mechanism for maybe transitioning you from finance work to artwork. Is that? Yeah,
because it was a difference in mindset. Okay. So at one time, if you're my age, you started photography with film, and that film could have been print film, which you sent out to get printed, and whatever the lab sent you is what you've got, or you shot slide film, and again, it got developed, but really what you shot was there. So if you didn't have everything perfect for that image, you pretty much threw that image away. You might have used a slide duplicator or something to process it, but before the digital world came about, it was either something good or something that you didn't use. Right. Once you get to the digital world, everything becomes, I call this the difference between a capture mindset, everything is perfect in camera, to a create mindset where the camera is just the first step. Yeah. And that's where we've come. It's sort of like someone picking up a guitar, playing Stairway to Heaven, and then thinking, wow, wouldn't it sound great if I did something different? Yeah, and as you were talking about it, there's a strong analogy on the technology side in music production, which is obviously something we do here, where the technology of
recording sound first existed in the capacity where it could just capture what was performed in a room, and you had basically an archival recording of what occurred during a specific real-life performance. And then there was this slow sort of transition. It actually started when it was still analog tape through to where we are now with digital recording, where it when you add the ability to overdub, which is to add a new instrument along with the previous instruments at a different point in time, it removes that strictness of saying this is an archive of a performance that happened on this date by these people. It now becomes a longer sentence, and then we added this, and then we added that a week later, and then a month later we did that. And so I always, funnily enough, use the analogy of the recording becoming less of a photography endeavor, less of a photograph, and more of a painting style endeavor where you can keep adding layers onto the canvas. And I'm mixing the metaphors a little bit with, but it basically works.
No, that's absolutely, I've been saying absolutely a lot. I'm going to have to, my goal is to stop saying
It's okay.
absolutely.
It's because I'm absolutely right a lot of the time. It's not your fault.
Absolutely true.
Okay.
Yeah. You have, give me just a second.
Take it, yeah.
You have that piece where you have something that you're starting with, and there's no reason for it to be the end piece. So in photography, I break it down into a couple of different groups. Mostly I think about my work as documentary work as opposed to artwork, and then I find art being something even a different level. Documentary might be a wedding shot. What you've seen is photographing a wedding, and you do what you capture what everybody's doing.
Right.
But if you start adding direction and composition, even that becomes art to some extent. You can have really beautiful wedding photos. You could just have wedding photos.
Right.
Right. So that's documentary. I do a lot of photography for the Sagamore Yacht Club in Oyster Bay. We're going out and I'm photographing the races on the Wednesday night series. I can just photograph those boats. I could do them creatively, looking for angles, but I could take them into Photoshop and I could make silhouettes out of things that weren't silhouettes. I could take my bland skies and turn them into beautiful sunsets, and create all new work. I could focus on people who are operating the sailboats, who are sailors, and make them the hyper-focus where, there's a sailboat in there somewhere, but look at what those people are doing. Right? So all of a sudden that's going from documentary, I'm just taking pictures of a race, to creating art out of that. Right. And then I can extend that even further. One of my photos, and this is going back to 2008, won the illustration of the year for Professional Photographers of America, and it's a sailboat photo. It's actually two photos. My first time playing in Photoshop, where I said, wow, this is a crappy sunset, and this is a crappy picture of boats. But I looked at them and I said, gotta learn Photoshop sometime. And I spent about 13 hours trying to figure out how I could make something beautiful out of these two not beautiful photos. Right. And became an award winner that people always love and always think of it as a painting, and not as a photo.
Yeah, that's cool too. I mean, we can do similar things now in the recording studio with things like vocals that may not sound so great or drums that may not be so in time, and we can look at them and say, well, how can I make this into something beautiful? And then when it's done, everyone still enjoys listening to it, and most are unaware of what editing took place.
And some people think of that as cheating, right? But it's not. And they think about the same thing. The big question of photography is, did you capture it that way or did you Photoshop it? Right. It doesn't matter. My goal isn't to capture a moment. Sometimes it is, but my goal is to present something to people that is art and beautiful. And it doesn't matter how I got there, whether I drew it, photographed it, Photoshopped it, did 15 other things to it, painted over the Photoshop with real paint. Right. Well, all that matters is that my end image is a pleasing image that meets my personal aesthetic, and hopefully that other people like and will buy.
And I think what you're touching on is a focus on the art and the ends of the art, right? Where in that paradigm, the ends justify the means because all that matters is getting to a piece of art that people enjoy. And then from within the photography community, and to draw an analogy, like within the music community, you have subsets of people. Like there can be, let's say, a performance mindset is similar to the capture mindset, where it's like the authenticness of something that happened here in real life that we're then capturing. And then, in the music world, that is like, okay, well, did you like really sing it that well, or did you really play it that in groove or in time? And that is mostly only important to the others in your industry, in my experience. It's only important to the other people who are trying to create this stuff, and it's usually not important unless something is so obviously ruined by an editing technique that it's no longer enjoyable, which can happen. You can push things too far or make it unbelievable, right? But if it feels good to the end user, or the consumer, or the viewer, or the listener of the art that you're making, their experience is the end goal that you're after, and not the verification of the process being something that could have also happened 80 years ago. No one really cares about that.
Yeah, but that's common. Everybody knows that there's the studio version and there's the live version.
Sure.
Right? And if you can make that studio version have as much energy as the live version. I mean, seeing Clapton doing Layla and hearing it on the album is two different experiences.
Sure.
And both of them are good.
Both of them are enjoyable, yeah. And it's, when it comes to, making a record, the idea is that, well, this has to be the quintessential version of it because it can be listened to over and over and over again. And then when it's live, it can be a little different every time, and that's okay. And if there's a mistake, you just do it a little different the next time you play it, and it, everyone experiences it in the moment, and then it's gone. But when you have that pressure of doing it over and over and over again, you want to make it great, and that's sort of like the, documentary of a moment versus Photoshop it, paint it, make it into art, make it perfect.
Make it bloom,
Yeah.
I guess would be a great way to
maximize it with the ultimate, compared to the ultimate vision that you have of it in your mind, right? If you think it can be this thing, and then on this one day it's here, or it's here, it's like, okay, how can I get it all the way up here? And at a certain point, it doesn't matter how we get it there as long as it gets there.
The difference between what the camera sees and what the photographer sees.
Right.
And that's all the difference in the world. It's a big difference between most amateur photographers and most professional photographers. It's that post-process. Whether it's a documentary photo, requires post-process to be really sharp and make sure that the story's told, or the artwork. It takes some vision and it takes some skill to bring something from what the camera can do. Because the two cameras taking the same picture, well, it's going to give you the same picture. The cameras aren't going to make any other real decisions for you.
And in a way, when you talk about documentary style things and you want to capture something authentically as it's happening, if you had to direct everybody about how to stand and how to smile and light the whole thing, it would take away from the people actually experiencing the moment. If you can take an okay snap of it and they're all just organically having a good time, but then you can brighten it up in post-production, and then you've actually preserved the authenticness of the moment for the people that were there, and you've made it look a little cooler in post-production too, but in a way it reflects the experience they were having better than if you kind of made them miserable and forced everyone to smile extra wide until you had the perfect shot to capture.
And that's the concierge photography portion of my business, right? Where what we're trying to focus on the balance between getting great memories and inconveniencing everyone around us as little as possible.
Yeah.
Sometimes, they would refer to us as ninjas because no one really knows we're there. We're taking those pictures behind the scenes, and people look at them and they go, "Oh my God, I don't remember you taking that photo, but look at how good I look." Or and sometimes, I'll trade a lousy technical photo of grandma who might not be here next week for rather than throw it out and say, well, that's not a good photo, because not every photo is going to be perfect, but it's that memory. The memories is sometimes way more important than the technical side of it.
Sure. Yeah. And the idea of the ninja is there's a when you're recording an existing band, and I'm always just drawing everything back into what I do because I can't help it, but when you're recording an existing band, there's this philosophy of making the recording process invisible if you can. In other words, if you can find a way to just let the band do what they do and capture it, then you get the most authentic thing, rather than kind of like, okay, everyone, now we're going to do this, and
Right.
you know, and like it takes away from what their normal flow is. Of course, things are different when you're like an individual building up tracks in the studio one thing at a time. You don't really have that option, but in that case where there is a real organic thing that's happening in the moment, if you can find a way to just let it happen as it normally does and capture it, even if you're sacrificing what would be a little bit of perfection when it comes to the light here and the angle there, it's better to get the authentic thing and then figure out how to make it work
Sure.
afterwards.
And in live production, perfection is the enemy of the excellent.
Good. Okay, I like that even better. Perfection is the enemy of the excellent, because I've heard it as perfection is the enemy of the good, but you could still be excellent and not be perfect, and if you let perfection stop you from doing anything at all, then you can't even get to excellent.
Yeah. If you're recording in the studio and you have a budget for do it for 6 months or a year and you really need to have perfection, by all means. But if what you're doing is bringing something authentic to life, being a one-shot recording, hey, we did it in one shot.
Yeah.
What could be better than that?
Sometimes that works better than doing it in a year or 6 months, but every project is unique, and that's the nature of art, right? Each piece of art that you produce gets to kind of live by its own rules, in terms of, the artist deciding what is best for that particular project. Something might need to sit on an easel for a long time. Something maybe is done in an afternoon, and I think it's similar across all of them. Some pieces of art just emerge and they exist and they're quick, and then some of them are more like labors of tedious love that you keep toiling away at.
There's if you have a vision, you tend to work, at least I tend to work, I think most artists tend to work towards that vision, and there's always usually a way to achieve that vision, and you want to spend the time. You don't want to look at something and say, well, that's almost what I wanted. So you could spend hours and days on a single image to say, oh yeah, now that's finally the start of what I did now meets my goal.
Yeah. And the frustrating part, I think, is that sometimes that process happens exceedingly quick, and sometimes it doesn't. And you can be very confident after it happens quick a few times and say, I've got it now. All my art is going to go fast and smooth and be excellent all easily. And then you find yourself having to take longer on one, and you get humbled by the process.
A lot of humble.
Yeah, there's a lot of humble in art.
And it's not all art.
Yeah.
One of the things that we do, you mentioned my headshot rescue piece. There is an art that very much so to headshots, but not every headshot needs to be art. Headshots could have a goal.
Yeah.
Well, if you're an actor, you're trying to get roles. If you're a model, you're trying to get gigs. If you're an artist, you're trying to represent yourself and your art in a way that's going to bring people to buy your album.
Yeah, headshots seem like, and there's similar work in the world of music where there's more of where art meets the artisan or the craft, where there's sort of a more of a clear template about what things need to be, and a standard that you can uphold things to, using various technical tools, and try to bring each of the things that you work on to this particular standard. And I think the headshot rescue, which, tell me more about the rescue part, because I know we could just talk about the photography of headshots, but I'm interested in the rescue part, because bringing everyone to that same standard of looking good for a headshot has a lot of functions.
But it is. I mean, the technical side is the lighting, the personal side is the coaching,
Right.
But everything really has to be, every person who's getting a headshot has their own reason for getting it. Are they using it for dating? Are they using it for business? What business are they in? A musician should have a different headshot than a nurse.
Sure.
Shouldn't be the same. And the headshot rescue came about because I had volunteered for this group, Exchange Executive Consultants of New York. They run boot camps for people who are looking for employment.
Okay.
So they had in one of their classes 55 people who were about to graduate, none of them who had headshots. So they were all about to go out and look for jobs.
Right.
And they came to me and said, hey, listen, can you help us out? I said, sure. If you got people looking for jobs, I'd be very happy to help. So I donated, believe it or not, the 55 headshots we did in under 2 hours.
Wow.
For the capture. So that was setting up the lighting, getting everybody in, and coaching them within under a minute as they waited online to get their headshot. But the goal there was to help people find jobs. It was very important. That was a couple of years ago. And although I can't always donate my time for headshots, what I can do is help people find jobs, find dates, improve their business. LinkedIn says the most important part of your profile is a professional headshot. Mm-hmm. So making sure that people are always working or looking their best in social media for their business. So it helps build business connections, personal connections, and all of that. So we now have a program that we because, again, I had mentioned I can't afford to pay for everybody's headshots, but we do is deferred payment headshots. So we partner with groups and people like Audio Workstation to set up headshot days where people could come in as long as they are unemployed, actively seeking work, and have a resume in hand. Do the headshots, let them know what it would cost, what it should cost, and hopefully when they find a job, they'll pay us.
Right. And I'm excited because we're talking about setting up one of those events here. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we finalized the date yet, but we'll put the date in the description and put it up on screen just in case we have to alter it or anything. But
I think we're shooting for January 19th from 11 to 5.
Awesome.
But that was just today's discussion.
Okay, if that changes, we'll edit it in. But as of now, that's our date. Mm-hmm. And I'm excited because, it means that we can help out in this cause and people get to see our facilities. It's a win-win. Now, that probably involves a little bit of post-production for you too, right?
The post-production is also free. So what happens is we take the photos, we slot 5 minutes per person.
Okay.
Sometimes I could do a headshot for someone in one take. I'm like, okay, we're done.
Right.
Very rare, but sometimes that happens.
Sure.
Typically 15, 20 photos. I coach people through the stands and looks. And when I think we've got something that they could use, and again, I'm not looking for that perfection in my lighting. I'm looking for the excellent. Mm-hmm. We post it online. They get to go and choose a photo, and I do a little bit of photoshopping, take a couple of years off, a couple of pounds off, very, very few. But mostly, the most important thing about a headshot is that it represents the person for when they're meeting people. No one should ever look at your headshot and then meet you and think, oh,
who was that?
Was you? That's not there. So the goal is really to coach people to the best headshot possible, and we help them put their best face forward. In social media or however they're going to use to find their job.
Well, that's excellent. It's not often that you find like fine art and, programs like that really helping people coming together. The photography is sort of the weave that stretches throughout all that. I really like how you run the range of photography to fine art, and sometimes the photography is the starting point for the fine art, and where all those sort of discussions of capturing something versus creating something start to get a little bit more complicated. That's the fun art type discussions for me. So I'm happy that you were able to play around in that space with me a little bit today.
Thanks. Because the important thing for me is that I love photography. Mm-hmm. So it's not that, someone's a wedding photographer, then they put their cameras away and they don't do any more pictures till next Saturday or Sunday.
Sure.
When I'm on vacation, I'm doing underwater photography. My Here, There, Everywhere collection is photographs in 37 countries and 27 states.
That's awesome. I'm a fan of the underwater stuff because I'm not getting into scuba gear. So I need somebody like you to go take those pictures for me so I could sit on a couch breathing air and enjoy the beauty of the fish.
Sure. Well, it's important for me to do. People don't have that opportunity to see it. It was actually just a shark attack in Maui just last week, and only a woman passed. And
that's unfortunate.
That is less than 12 a year, and I'm shark diving every year.
Wow.
Sometimes in the water with 40, 50 sharks, and it never really occurs to me. They're such beautiful creatures, and they have their own purpose. They're not interested in me. So it's very rare.
Yeah.
So where it's a whale shark, a whale, a shark, an octopus, shrimp, these things that people don't see, I like to bring them and share them so people think more about protecting the oceans.
Sure. I feel like from what I've read, that the shark attacks are more like shark mistakes, where they're mistaking you for some other thing that they would normally eat because of the way that it looks in the water or the way that it smells to them, whatever the case may be.
Mostly visual, you know, something
splashes in the right way.
Surface look like turtles.
Yeah.
Or there's a type of seafood called abalone, which is a flat shell that lives on rocks.
I have some in the fretboard of a guitar, actually, making the little dots that tell you what a fret it is.
So they go down and they come straight back up, and it's the same swimming profile as a seal or a sea lion. Yeah. So most of the time, it's a bite. There's not enough fat in most humans for the sharks to be interested for the energy, and they're like, okay, well, I don't want that.
Yeah.
So it's a taste. And it's like, well, okay, I'm not going to bother with it.
Yeah. If only we could speak to them, we could just be like, hey, we're just riding a wave, man. It's not lunchtime. But I'm sorry to hear about that woman. But okay, so underwater photography is a very cool thing, and I'm glad to be able to look at your underwater work. We talked briefly about using different cameras just before the podcast for different purposes. And we'll just end on this one super technical note. And you don't have to say which brands you use for which, but I just wanted to convey to the audience that sometimes when you're asking a question to someone who's working in a technical field with equipment, and you say, what is the best brand of X? You know, if they say to you, what's the best camera? If they say to me, what's the best studio software or something, often the answer is more complicated than you want. And it's, well, if you're doing this kind of work, then think about this. And if you're doing that kind of work, so you were telling me you use a different type of camera for the underwater stuff versus the above ground stuff. And then what was the third thing?
For drone work.
Oh, okay, for up in the air.
So for up in the air, for me, it's not a toy it's not a plane to fly.
Right.
It's a camera with a different angle.
Yeah.
And different capabilities.
And that's a big thing now. We didn't really talk about that specifically yet, but I'm imagining that there's a lot more of that. You know, the angles that used to be limited to like needing to hire a helicopter. You know, you used to have to get a helicopter to shoot these kind of very cinematic overhead views of landscape. But now you can fly a drone. Is that something that you've been doing a lot of?
I don't do a lot of it. I'm doing a lot of other things. I've had work done. I did drones for one of the TV series. Did 3 houses for them. Drone. That's cool. 3 houses.
Is it fun?
Yeah, it's fun. And I did three movies. I was
cool.
Director of photography for 3 short films, and in 2 of them we have drone footage that I did. Even though as a director I'm not really the camera person, but certain scenes I took over to do.
Gotcha.
To do the drone work.
So as director of photography, you get to supervise the camera people? Is that the idea?
The lighting, angles, and even though it's supervised, it's really more about consulting, because at the end of the day, it's the director's job to approve an angle.
Sure. I often make the analogy for people inquiring about roles and jobs inside of music production to a video crew, because there seems to be a slightly better understanding in the general public of, like, let's say a cinematographer, director of photography role versus a movie director. And I often use those 2 roles to explain the job of audio engineer versus music producer, because it's very similar. One is a primarily technical role, and the other one is a creative, artistic role, but they have to do a lot of interplay in order to achieve what is going to go on. Sometimes you have people that can do either one, that are switching roles on different projects in order to, achieve different people's visions at different times.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, the director's vision is the one that counts.
Correct.
And sometimes we'll shoot things 3 or 4 different ways because the director wants it one way.
Okay.
And we think that there's other opportunities, and there's both time and budget to try alternates. So sometimes that vision is bigger. Same thing with music.
Yeah.
The collaboration is bigger
Yeah.
than all the individuals who are taking part.
Yeah,
of
and
it.
that's the beauty of it, is that even though the director or the music producer is the one with the ultimate say, sometimes the choices that they have widen greatly when they're working with a good team who can then present to them options that they may not have even thought of, that then become their prerogative to be able to choose what they want. You can give options to the editors and the director that they didn't think of when they were conceiving of it. So, all right, awesome. Well, we've talked a while. I feel like we should probably wrap it up before we start discussing every drip on Jackson Pollock's floor. But I really appreciate you coming down. And also, by the way, as a last note, currently Alex's work is, some of Alex's great work is being displayed at our studios. And we're very excited to have him be the first artist displaying art on our walls, because we're making a concerted effort to step outside of just the music realm and include more of the visual arts in what we do here at Audio Workstations. And, we're happy to talk about that here on the Long Island Local Podcast with you. So thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you. It's great talking to you.
All right. That was awesome. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And we will see you next time.
Hi there. This is Alex M. Wolff of Alex M. Wolff Fine Art, a photographer. I also have a brand called Concierge Photography, which does general photo work, events of all kinds. You can reach me at 516-375-4315, headshotrescue.com, and alexmwolffineart.com are the best websites to look up my work.